Hello everyone, welcome back to another kind of random video. I know it's been like, over a year again, but that is okay because I'm back for the summer from my first year at college and I wanted to make a little something for the channel. I wasn't sure what I was going to do at first, but I was just kind of chilling on Twitter and I saw this thread that caught my interest. But before I get into literally anything, I want to remind everyone that there will be absolutely no harassing of anyone mentioned in this video. If you disagree or even agree with them, just please be normal when you log into social media and start typing. It's pretty easy, and this is a very respectful and thoughtful video, so let's all be normal. So anyway, on June 2nd, this Geometry Dash creator, Airma, a really nice person in Geometry Dash Twitter, posted this tweet about these levels that have been making a splash in the 2.2 world. These are these line dash maps made by this creator Sp4rce and have been featured on showcase channels like Nexus numerous times in the past few weeks, as well as getting rated and featured by RobTop. They're pretty basic gameplay wise, as from what I can tell they use this wave on a multi-activate blue orb to go back and forth in this forward moving diagonal pattern through like a tricky map. There are quite a few of these in this series, and as you can imagine the gameplay does get quite repetitive, but other than that, no problem, right? Just some cool levels made by a creator, admittedly, that are somewhat repetitive in nature. But as you can very likely tell, there's a big asterisk next to the design of these levels. The creator Sp4rce started making these levels with their map Dancing Line a few months ago, pretty clearly emulating the popular mobile game by the same name, but has since found a different formula to making these levels successful, which is to design them by using the assets and overall style or level progression of various popular levels in Geometry Dash. So far, 6 levels have been created since the unassuming original, with recent installments becoming increasingly controversial. Dash, 9 Circles, Retray, Congregation, and Tidal Wave are all the levels that have been so far put into this style, alongside another map called the Typhoon, but that's original as far as I can tell. So that's kind of the rundown of what these levels are about, and pretty much all the info you need for us to actually talk about what the big deal is. I mentioned a tweet by Airma at the start of the video, and that's kind of our bouncing point for all this. I want to talk about what she said in her tweet, explore her perspectives and ideas about asset repurposing, how this all connects to our rate system and community creating space, and all the while, of course, give my thoughts on these talking points. So without further ado, let's dig into Airma's tweet. So a few days ago, Airma tweeted this for all GD Twitter to see, and as of writing this, it's approaching 1,000 likes and has reached a large amount of support and agreement. Of course, this is what made me so interested in talking about this topic because people seem to care about it, and I think it's a pretty interesting situation. Why I think so is something I'll explain as we go, but let's take a look at what she said first. So June 2nd, 2:06 PM, quote, "These levels are starting to bother me. It's been proven that the creator literally copies and pastes deco from the original levels, and according to OniLink, permission was not obtained. I thought asset stealing levels weren't supposed to get rated," end quote. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and it's hard to know where to start, but let's first address her main gripe, that this creator is quite literally copying and pasting decoration and assets from other levels into this level. When we hear that as a community, it seems like quite the intense crime, with all the asset stealing scandals we've seen together, and just from a perspective of artistic integrity, of course it's wrong to steal assets, why would you think otherwise? But I want to slow you down a bit there and really discuss what this means. Let's form it into a question we can try and answer. Is the unchanged reuse of assets from other levels into your level fundamentally problematic or not? Now we can really weigh into what this question is all about. Airma has a very clear opinion here, that the unchanged reuse of assets from other levels into a different level by a different creator is a fundamentally bad and wrong thing. It is morally bankrupt and it is tasteless art. But I want to challenge that idea. Hear me out and let's think about it like this for a second. Art, as a concept, is forever entwined with the inspiration of others' works onto your own, no matter to what extent that influence is worn on the sleeve of any given creation. I'm sure we can all agree with that, but the real question to be answered here is, where should the line in the sand be drawn? In other words, at what point does the reuse of someone else's intellectual property become unacceptable and should be considered taboo? Of course, the answer to this question is different for all mediums of art, but I want to give you a clear answer to that question for Geometry Dash levels. It is my belief that, as long as there are original elements to the levels you make, the reuse of others' assets, ideas, progression, concepts, and overall intellectual property is generally fair game if you give a clear nod to the original level you are taking from. To expand upon this further, it is my belief that spin-offs of others' works are completely acceptable no matter to what extent they reuse or even blatantly copy and paste assets, as long as they are recreating those assets into a new vision with a perspective of their own. But again, I want to clarify an extremely important detail. That is all under a large asterisk of implied credit. I am not okay with asset stealing that attempts to be hidden and passed as original. The greatest modern example of this would be the controversy around Natural Disaster, with numerous pieces of art being stolen silently, passed as original. But as I hope you can see, these line levels are clearly giving nod to the originals they are taking from the clear design portrayals to the literal names of the maps. These levels are taking from popular and known creations and reusing their assets for a new purpose. In this case, these line-style spin-offs, creating a fun twist on what we know as creative pillars in the GD community. And I want to also be very clear about the originality of these levels. I have seen many people on Twitter say that these levels aren't original, and that they are repetitive and bland, and therefore they are bad. And under my definition of what asset and concept reuse is okay, if they fail to do something original with those assets and concepts, they're not acceptable. But there's two types of conflicting originality here that must not be confused. There's the originality of when you compare all the line levels side by side to themselves, and then there's the originality in comparison to the level they are taking inspiration from. Those are two completely separate things, and while yes, they may be a little bland and unoriginal when you compare them all side by side, the point is that when compared to the levels they are taking assets from, they are an original work. They do something entirely different and novel, making a dancing line map that not only has completely different gameplay from all the levels it reuses art from, but also a completely different perspective on what it means to be a Geometry Dash level. And if that isn't original concept-wise to you, I don't really know what to tell you. Now, whether you realize it or not, this is generally how GD artistic culture has always worked. From levels like Ultimate Demon Mix to even gauntlet levels like Cataclysm, assets and even entire parts and level progressions or concepts from bigger levels have been continuously, in quote, stolen, reused, and repurposed for a different image of a general level with clear respects paid. This all fits my definition of what should be acceptable for direct asset, concept, and or intellectual property reuse / copying. But of course, I'm not just going to use that as my argument for its validity. It's flimsy to say that just because it's been the norm, it should be accepted. To combat this, let's talk about a weird thought that might challenge what I have offered, and see if it solidifies or breaks down my argument. Something that seems like a very real rebuttal to what I have to say is the fact that, if I am so okay with asset reuse under these guises, and that I believe we all should be too, why wouldn't we start seeing this happen more and often the more we think this way, and see it more in increasingly tasteless and unacceptable manners? Isn't this a problematic mindset because with this definition I have offered, you would see creators stealing things from other levels all the time, only progressing further as it is normalized, creating an atmosphere where idea theft is accepted? Hey, Editor Northborg here. I wanted to quickly interject because I can already see the comments flooding in about this part in particular, telling me I'm actually proving my own point wrong because we already live in a climate of asset theft to a certain extent. I realized while editing I did not flesh out that perspective in my original script as much as I wanted, and I wanted to include this little segment to explain a deeper understanding of how this mindset of asset reuse I'm preaching actually prevents this asset theft from continuing to be commonplace or be a problem. Now, I will absolutely be the first to admit that there are asset theft issues, and while I think it was more of a serious issue a few years ago and it has improved greatly with our creative climate being incredibly fresh right now, it is true that generally you can look at any number of design levels in particular and you might see certain things everyone copies off each other with no original source in sight. Now that is a problem, but the reason this problem exists is because there's no line in the sand about what asset use is acceptable, and creators therefore have no real baseline as to what to pull from and how. While creators in the past generally followed the trend of asset reuse I've preached thus far in this video, which was my point of this whole segment, they have also in modern times become a little more comfortable with quietly reusing assets, which has come from community developments in the past few years. My argument here actually aims to fix that as well. With a clear line in the sand and an understandable guideline on how to reuse assets, creators would actually have an easier time understanding what they should and shouldn't do, and would be held more accountable when they break those guidelines. Of course, it's wishful thinking to think that the entire community will see this video and adopt my personal definition, but this is a video to share my thoughts about what would be a functional idea for our community if truly implemented, not some wishy-washy here nor there uncertain perspectives on what's okay and what's not. And using these line levels as an example, I'm showing how confused we are as to what should be accepted and what shouldn't, and that's why I wanted to make this video. Arama's tweet actually speaks volumes. She says she thought levels with asset theft weren't supposed to get rated, which is showing that as a community we really do lack these guidelines. So anyway, I wanted to flesh out my thoughts there and not open the door of having to explain myself in the comments. And as far as proof that widely adopting this mindset would not cause level theft, I'm going to explore that in the continuation of the standard script, so enjoy the rest of the video. Picking up right where we left off, let's talk about why my definition of free asset reuse under certain guidelines would absolutely not create widespread asset theft. There are two main things that would stop this from happening at a fundamental level. I'll be point blank with the first one. Blatant asset copying like this is rarely acceptable. This is because it is difficult to create something that copies assets so directly like these line levels have done, and still makes an original concept an end product. That is why I said at the start of this video, these levels are such an interesting case study for ideas about asset reuse and intellectual property protection in Geometry Dash. They are one of those few examples in GD history where we actually have some levels blatantly reusing concepts and art, while actually managing to make an original end product with it. And again, these are original compared to the level the assets are being used from, not the general series. Now I say this all to illustrate just how hard it is to create such a level that manages to do something out of the box enough that it can directly reuse assets and still have an original concept to fit my personal definition of what asset reuse is okay. With 2.2, of course, these levels have become much more possible, but they are never, ever going to be the norm. These levels will always be funny little spin-offs that do not at all affect the general creating landscape, and will not promote asset stealing or disrespectful reuse on a large scale because creators know they can't just reuse decoration unless they very clearly pay respect to the original level and show a good reason to. And that brings me to my second point, that it is extremely difficult to directly reuse assets and make them clearly pay homage to the original level. With these line levels, it is of course extremely easy to see where the decoration is sourced from. But if you try to mix this stealing decoration idea into a more original and traditional level that doesn't so clearly pull from something, it would end up in the box of not clearly showing the influence on your sleeve enough to pass for such blatant asset reuse or copying. And at that point it ends up more like a natural disaster type situation, where the assets are being stolen silently. With these two things that inevitably come into play, this mindset about acceptable reuse of assets will not lead to the general promotion of idea theft and make the community creating space worse off. And if you want proof, like I said, look to the past however many years it's been since 1.9. This mindset of creating has been at play that entire time, ever since something like Ultimate Demon Licks came out, whether you realized it or not, and it has never promoted asset stealing on a grand scale. I believe that since levels like Natural Disaster and that whole situation, we've become much more sensitive to direct asset reuse, and we have lost sight of the important perspective to differentiate contrasting circumstances. But we're not even done with picking apart this part of ARMA's tweet, as we still need to talk about the reverse idea, the one ARMA stands by, and why that mindset is actually more problematic than the rule I proposed a few minutes ago. As we read together, ARMA has preached in her tweet that any blatant and copied reuse of assets, when literally copied and pasted, is a fundamentally flawed practice. That is not a stretch or anything, read her tweet, that is literally what she said put into formal sentence, and I'm not putting words in her mouth there. This is actually a far more problematic mindset than what I have proposed as my perspective. The reason for this is pretty simple. When you think like this, it actually limits the creative space of Geometry Dash and the creating culture as a whole. Like I said, there have been numerous examples of the approach I've preached over the years working out perfectly fine, and some pretty cool levels have come out of it. Not to mention, what about stuff like the silly congregation jump scare jokes that happen in levels where you randomly end up in congregation if you fall out of the map? Obviously that's just a silly joke, and it's a much less serious thing than claiming an entire level stole its designs, but is it any different? When it comes down to it, I am looking for a clear line in the sand about what asset reuse should be seen as theft, and as a community we should be too. There should be no buts, no exceptions to the rule that you personally stand by. ARMA's perspective limits what creators can do within the realm of creative interpretation, reimagination, and overall freedom to mess around with new perspectives on what it could mean to be a Geometry Dash level. Under the opinion she brandishes in her tweet that it is fundamentally wrong to copy and paste assets, those silly congregation jump scare jokes should be disallowed. And you could try to say that it's a less serious example and I'm making stuff up there, but I'm really not. When you think about it like she does, where do you draw the line? And if there is clear originality behind the asset copying and repurposing, just like those congregation jokes that are in rated levels, what is the problem? When you look at it like this, at least to me, my definition is much more functional to how our community actually works, and what creates the most artistic freedom while condemning stealing and immoral practices in the editor. Now, there's been two other arguments about why this is all immoral, and we're going to touch on those. They come down to creator consent and creator port farming, but before we get there, I want to mention one last thing about ARMA and Friends' thoughts about all this. When you break it down, their mindset that any blatant reuse of assets, intellectual property, concepts, etc. is taboo, it starts to logically extend into territory of condemning things like level remakes. Now, that might sound a little crazy and kinda out of left field, but hear me out for a second. If you think about it, what are level remakes? They are remaking another level aesthetically, adding new coats of paint, taking from what the original established and running with it with new perspectives and ideas, and by nature, blatantly copying not necessarily designs, but the level's progressions, ideas, and overall intellectual property. The same thing as copying block designs, just in a more abstract sense. Now, hold on. I'm not saying that Aerma and those who agree with her are arguing that level remakes are wrong. Please do not think I'm putting words in their mouths. The only reason I say this is to show the kind of restricting attitude that they are harboring, and how the further you go down that rabbit hole, the more that mindset logically extends to denying level remakes from existing, denying the blatant reuse of intellectual property. Meanwhile, under my definition, level remakes fit nicely under the clause of clear respects to the original level, while doing something new and with fresh perspectives and ideas. Level remakes very clearly give their homage and intellectual property credit back to the level they are remaking, just like the line levels give their homage to the levels they are taking block designs from. And at the same time, both of them are taking those stolen assets and doing something new and original with them. It's the same thing, whether you are copy and pasting decoration or the abstract structure and concept of a level. And again, I'm not saying Aerma is arguing that level remakes are wrong, but I'm trying to point out why that mindset is so restrictive about what a Geometry Dash creation can look like, and what creative freedoms we should give builders in the editor. Now, that's enough about the fundamental claims and ideas about all this. Let's dig a little deeper into the next part of the tweet Aerma posted. The fact that OniLink, the creator of the famous Extreme Demon Tidal Wave, did not give credit and did not allow for Tidal Line, the Tidal Wave line remake, to be created, going as far as to disdain its existence on Twitter. What does this mean for my argument, and how does that fall into my personal definitions established? Let's dive deeper beneath the tidal wave. Or line. Okay, I'll stop. Now, as Aerma's tweet mentioned, OniLink did not approve of Tidal Line existing. That's the first order of business here. It is very clear that Sp4rce, the creator of Tidal Line and this entire line series, did not contact OniLink and ask for permission to create this level and to blatantly reuse the assets. Now, a lot of people have told me on Twitter, follow me by the way, @Norkborg1, that this clearly shows these levels are morally bankrupt and fail to meet what should be commonplace standards for reusing assets. I disagree though. I have a pretty easy rebuttal in fact. It's play at your own risk when it comes to that stuff. You can create levels all you want with reusing and copying assets as long as, to me, they fit the personal definition I previously established. But if you end up using assets from a level and the creator doesn't approve, that's on you. That is not a fundamental issue with these levels, and I think a lot of people are mistaking that. There's no fundamental problem with the concept of copying assets just because someone did not get credit when they did it. Those two things are not equivalent. Now, as far as my opinions on that specifically, I believe if a creator tells you they don't want you doing that, you have a responsibility to take that level down or change it in a way that they see fit. And I also think that, if you are so clearly taking assets, you should do your best to at least try and reach out to the creator of the level and get their permission. And if they don't respond or you can't end up breaching them, then that's more on them than you. But again, I cannot stress enough, just because Sp4rce is living a bit on the edge and has not been getting credit for their asset reuse, does not mean there's a fundamental problem with what they're doing. All it means is they're running the risk of finding themselves in a situation where the creator disapproves. And as I said, if you ask me and ask how our creating culture should be oriented, I believe the level should be taken down or should fall into line with whatever wishes the original creator requests at that point. With that said, it's a pretty simple extension of the argument and ideas I've already laid out for you very clearly in the previous part of the video. It does not at all challenge my ideas, and only makes them more nuanced and compatible to the current community creating landscape. Before we close all this out, there's another big thing we have to talk about, and it's the idea of creator points, the rate system, and how all these levels fall into these constructs. In Aerma's tweet, she says at the end how she thought levels with stolen assets weren't supposed to get rated. Of course, I already talked extensively about my thoughts on quote-unquote stolen assets and levels, and that will hold true throughout this entire ending segment, but I think what she says there is interesting. Her ideas particularly about the rate system is not actually what I want to talk about, as I already basically did, but I do want to talk about my actual problem with these line levels and how they relate to the rate system. In my eyes, these line levels started as a novel and cool concept, but have unfortunately fallen into the trap of being milked as a successful creator point formula. They are quite lazy and repetitive, and like I said, while novel and unique at first, they have become something that exploits the creator point system for a digital symbol of status. However, this absolutely does not at all undermine all my previous points, that these levels are original from the levels they are taking their assets from, and they have every right to copy those assets directly based on what they offer as a level, unless being told otherwise by the original level creator. And while those ideals still hold true, I think that deep down this is many people's problem with these levels, that they have become a creator point farm. To me, they are not fundamentally flawed in how they are executed, but are a product of a fundamentally flawed system. Unfortunately, with tweets like Aerma's, these ideas are clouded by these conceptions about asset reuse and rate standards. What she says actually ends up taking away from, at least for me, the core of the problem, which is our rate system and the promotion of creator point farming, and probably the real reason a lot of people feel uneasy when they look at these levels and what they stand for. Not that the rate system has a problem with asset stealing like she paints it out to be, but that it has a problem with promoting lazy and repetitive levels like this. Now, RobTop does just rate whatever he wants, and it's not like he only rates lazy and repetitive levels, but it's been a problem for years now, and as long as it is a problem, these levels series will be created, because they are a byproduct of a larger issue within the system, but absolutely not a problem with asset stealing like it's being painted by people like Arama. That's where the real distaste I have for these levels lies, not in the asset reuse or anything like that, and that's where I think everyone's issues should lie, and the takeaway we should all receive, if anything. But I do want to offer a little bit of a reality check. I do think we have a problem with creator points, and the creating sphere is somewhat clogged in that vein, but I also think there are two types of creators in this game. There are those who create to get creator points, and then there are those who create to make true art that is alienated from that system, or anywhere in between those two extremes on the spectrum. And in 2.1 especially, we have seen an incredible rise in the latter mindset of creating, and that's an amazing thing. So I want to paint the clearest picture possible for you all, that this is not a doomsday for creating, and it's simply a product of creator point oriented creating. This will always exist as long as creator points exist, but is truly not an issue within the creating world of Geometry Dash. Artistic integrity has been on the rise for years now, and these levels will make no dent in that. So in my eyes, if you're going to have an issue with these levels, you shouldn't aim that at Sp4rce, but at the system. However, I truly do not think it is a serious issue, and the creating sphere of Geometry Dash will be plenty fine, as long as those two veins of creation exist, those who do it for digital status and those who do it for the art. And from what I've seen, as far as what the community loves and what standards we push upon the highest levels of creators, the art end of things is prevailing and always will prevail. And that's basically all I have to say about this. I know this was a pretty random little video, but it piqued my interest as a topic, so I thought I'd put my thoughts out on this wonderful platform you guys have gifted me over the years. To summarize, the line series is not fundamentally problematic. The way they reuse assets is a completely acceptable practice if you subscribe to the mindset I presented, that levels that reuse intellectual property in any way are perfectly cool, as long as it is in a fresh light, separate from the original level, respects are paid to that level, and permission is not denied. Of course, I hope I've managed to convince you of all that, or at least show you why I believe so. And as I said, these levels only end up being problematic if you observe them from how they abuse the rate system to farm creator points, a truth that ends up being shrouded by the stray claims of fundamental issue of creative asset reuse. But that is also not a call for serious concern. There has always been creator point of use, but the rise of integrity within GD art has only expanded over the last few years, and it shows no sign of stopping, creator points or not. So, as with all my community discussion videos, please leave a comment to let me know what you guys think about this. I'm really curious to see what my community has to say on the thoughts I have presented here. It's been great to talk to you guys again in the video, and if you want to see more of my super cool Geometry Dash opinions, follow me on Twitter at Norkbork1 or the link in the description. I hopefully will see you all soonish. I want to try and make a longer and more epic video this summer, but we will see how that goes. Comment any video ideas you guys might want to see in the future, as I'm actually trying to explore new options for the channel in the Geometry Dash vein. Love you guys, and I will talk to you all soon. Keep being awesome and keep being thoughtful. See y'all soon.